and I'm going to give my tips for small business and entrepreneurial marketing. The first thing and the most important thing, it sounds obvious, but I see a lot of companies that don't do this. Make sure you're actually building something or providing a service that actually has value, that actually matters in the world, something people actually want. There's been such an obsession, particularly in Silicon Valley, with giving away things for free that we tend to forget about the good of paid businesses. And the good thing about having paying customers is someone is telling you that your product or service is of value. And the flip side of that is you have to really believe in what you're doing. This has to be absolutely the thing you want to spend your day doing, because that's what's going to come across as infectious when you're out talking about your business, when you're trying to get other people to come along this journey with you, whether they're employees or investors or our customers. So you've got to believe you're doing something that fundamentally should exist in the world, and you have to be providing something of value. If you're just in this to make money or be famous, there are better ways to make money and be famous, because the journey of an entrepreneur is a heartbreaking one. I think my other tips would be really open. Over and over again, I see entrepreneurs in other parts of the world, especially parts of Asia, Africa, and South America, who are so worried about talking about their business or talking about their idea that they limit themselves because they don't get help from anyone else. They're so scared someone's going to steal an idea. And I think what made Silicon Valley really an amazing ecosystem is that it was such an open ecosystem. There was this view that, an idea is just an idea, and any great entrepreneur has tons of ideas in a given day. And most of the companies that we think of as really disruptive or really innovative weren't the first ones to even come up with an idea. It was their execution that worked. And if you're too closed off, you can't surround yourself with really smart people who will help that execution, because no one person is going to be able to do it. So I think openness is like the most counterintuitive thing that I see great entrepreneurs get wrong. The other thing is just to be aggressive. Aggressively go after mentors, aggressively go after people who can help your business. There's sort of story after story after story of people in Silicon Valley who moved there and were an absolute nobody, called up one of the Google founders, one of the Yahoo founders, famous venture capitalists, and just said they had an interesting idea. And 9 times out of 10, those people are happy to sit down with you and have coffee and talk about your idea. You never know if someone's going to say yes or not if you don't ask, and you're always better off asking. And most people will never back an entrepreneur who isn't gutsy enough to call up and cold call and ask for a meeting. Because if that's too intimidating, how are you possibly going to build a business? My last piece of advice is something that I think about every time I'm about to take a huge risk in my career. Every time I want to do something, but I'm a little bit scared to do it, or I think, this is a little too out there. I think about a story that Mark Andreessen told me about the earliest days when he moved to Silicon Valley in his early 20s, right before he helped co-found Netscape, which was, the iconic sort of the first consumer internet big IPO. So Mark moved there. He was in his early 20s. He'd done Mosaic at University of Illinois. He was definitely sort of this well-known coder rock star. But there were a lot of well-known coder rock stars in Silicon Valley. So one day, he got a call from Jim Clark, who was one of the most iconic founders, had started Silicon Graphics, and he said he wanted to meet with him. And Mark didn't even think it was the real Jim Clark, but he went and met with him, and he talked to him about starting this business that would become Netscape. And Mark thought about it, and he was like, well, yeah, I'll do this. And they talked about it. They wound up doing it. It wasn't until, and of course Netscape became the biggest IPO. Mark is now a billionaire, one of the most famous people in the Valley, all as a result of this meeting. He found out years later that he wasn't even the first kid that Jim Clark called. There were more than a dozen smart kids that Jim Clark called and had the same meeting with and said, let's start a company. The difference was Mark was the only one that said yes. And what this story, I think, always tells me over and over again is that, we all know no one's going to come knock on your door and say, here's a great business idea on a silver platter. But a lot of times you get pretty close to that. And the difference between a great entrepreneur and someone who only talks about being a great entrepreneur is simply the willingness to say yes.